We are in the Cienega Valley. This is the oldest operating vineyard in California. It was founded in 1849 and has been farmed every year since. It's also the original home of Pinot Noir, which was planted originally in 1861. Wow. So it's a really, really cool story, and we can go into it. Obviously, the property is a lot older than I am. I've been in the wine business since I was allowed to be. So I joined at 21, throwing boxes in the back of a warehouse here in California. Worked as a junior retail buyer to junior buyer to junior to buyer. And it's the last of those apprenticeship businesses where you can walk your way up through it, as I'm sure a lot of the folks who are watching today either have experienced or are on the path of experiencing. Became a sommelier. And then went to distribution, carried the bag for a famous woman named Martine Saunier with Martine Selections, and really learned much more about Pinot Noir and about the wine working with her. Then in my 20s, I left the US, went to France, lived there for 3 years, working with wineries and luxury goods companies. And then from France during the global financial crisis, the US was a tough spot to come back to, and decided to cast myself even further afield and moved to Hong Kong in 2008. And it was fantastic because that was the time when Hong Kong was just opening up to wines and auctions and all that stuff. And so I was based in Hong Kong, where I did a number of things in the wine business. I did a startup, then ran a global duty free for DFS, their wine business. And then from there, so that included JFK's airport wine assortment, with my apologies. And then went to Coravin, and I launched Coravin for Asia Pacific. And when all was said and done, I realized if I didn't get back to the wine business soon, I was going to be an executive and not a wine guy. Right. And that really wasn't the path for my life. And my thesis was that, I'm deeply in love with American wines and the arc of American wine history. And I wanted to come back and help an estate sort of not have to be bought by Constellation, or love Constellation, but it's not the best outcome for something with a lot of intrinsic history. Didn't want to be bought by private equity. Love guys in private equity, but they don't necessarily have a long view for ownership. And so spent a year and a half sitting across the table from a lot of families that were looking at retiring, whose kids didn't necessarily want to take over. I had no ambition to put my own name on a winery. For me, it was a role of stewardship, and the idea of helping a great estate be bigger than any one person, and to basically survive into the future indefinitely. And the thing we say here at Eden Rift is, it's 170 years old, and we can't pretend that we can't act as if we're at the end of its history. We have to recognize that we're in the middle, and none of us who are here today will see that end. And so it really helps you to remember who you are in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and I want to get into a bit more of the details, the history of the property, because, I find it very interesting. And it's also, if you could give us just a bit more history of the estates, but then also speak of the AVA, and because you're in a very unique location compared to a lot of regions like Monterey and Sonoma that people are, familiar with, or, Paso Robles. So give us just a bit about how the estate started, when you became involved with it specifically, and then about the AVA specifically would be great.
Sure. So yeah, I should have mentioned that part. So it took over in end of 2016, beginning of 2017. 2016 was our first vintage here on the property as Eden Rift. When we came in, it was not in great position, so we needed to reboot a lot of things. Vineyards were beautiful. We are on a band of limestone that basically starts where we are. That's us in that image. So actually, I'm sitting in the upstairs of that brown building there in the background. This one here, yes. So I'm just sitting in that building right now. We're sitting on a band of limestone that runs from underneath us down through Calera, famous vineyards like Enns and Wurs, and all the way down to basically Chalon. That's the limestone there. So it is legit. Our neighbors are state parks and an open limestone pit mine and quarry, which produces that rock. And so that's who we are. We are limestone, decomposed granite, cold climates, dominated by the winds coming off of Monterey Bay. This place has been Pinot Noir and Chardonnay for its history, with an interruption in the 90s, where it kind of went calatal for a minute. But that's what this place was built to do. It's what this place was built to be. And so our neighbors oftentimes will make some warmer climate grapes, but it's because there's so many microclimate pockets in our vineyard and the vineyards around us that really you can find places to grow just about anything. And in terms of where we are, Eden Rift, the name, references the fact that we're at the edge of the Pacific Plate. So behind me is Korea, and then basically my driveway is the San Andreas Fault, and then directly across the valley. So this picture you're looking at now, those hills on the farther side past the valley, that's actually the North American plate. So different tectonic plate without any limestone at all. And so limestone is really special because it's the foundational element found in Burgundy, found in Champagne, but really not available in the United States or in California for high quality winemaking. The only two places with significant limestone deposits are Cienega Valley, where we find ourselves, and Paso Robles, which is why Beaucastel set up Tablas Creek there. But it's a little too warm for Pinot and Chardonnay.
Yeah, so what's the microclimates? Are you more like Monterey Bay? Is it cooler, or are you more towards the Paso side in the warmth? Because
no, it's cold here. It's usually colder than Anderson Valley, where we find ourselves here. It's one of the colder appellations in Northern California. Our average temperature, 365 days a year, if you integrate 24 hours a day, it's about 56 degrees. So, we suffered a bit of frost the other day, which I'm a little bit bummed about. But we're on the cusp of winemaking, which is where you need to be to find energetic acidity. It's where you need to be to find wines that are going to really express themselves, not just as sort of kind of big reds or flamboyant whites, but wines that are highly mineral, acid delineated, very precise. You need to have that risk.
Exactly. Well, and it sounds like you've obviously made the right decision with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and we'll get into the wines specifically with the estate Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs and then a few other bottlings. But yeah, before we do that, give us a few more specs on the property itself. It looks like a beautiful, expansive property. How big is it? Are you only growing Pinot Noir and Chardonnay? How old are the vines? Give us a bit of the property itself.
Well, this property is an old property, and so whenever you have an old property, you get a lot of different stuff going on. Right. So it's a 500-acre estate. It's a single valley. It's our vision of what an estate vineyard looks like. It's a single valley, single water catchment, surrounded by state parks. So there's no influence of overspray, no influence from any other vineyards around us. We actually have no phylloxera as a result. Wow. The vineyards themselves, it's 120 acres, about almost 70% planted to Pinot Noir across 9 clones. Let's see, the oldest vines are 1906 planted Zinfandel. So we've got an acre of that, which is phenomenal. I never really pictured myself making Zin, but after the first year we did it, I was like, God, this is amazing. And we didn't know how to make Zinfandel, so we basically made it like Pinot Noir or like a 1970s style Zin, where extraction was not the point. Anyway, that's a sideline. That's not even a relevant wine.
That's cool,
no, our focus has been Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Most of our Pinot vines date back to the mid-90s or late 90s, and we have about 20% of our estate is terraces, which you can see down there in that bottom left of that image you've got up. And those terraces are quite extreme. They're quite steep and extremely rare. 20% terraces, all cut in about 96, 97. You could never do it now, but we'll farm them. Yes, those are the terraces. So that is Q Block, also known as the Lansdale Slope.
So besides the amazing terroir that you have, what about, because I know conversations in California always lead to water sources. So water sources, but also elevation. What's your elevation at the property?
So we have a ton of microclimates. Our elevation ranges from 1,200 to 1,600 feet. And it makes that elevation gain very quickly because of the effect of the terraces. We're working with, it's basically from the A block, which is the farthest reaches of our Chardonnay, we're going to be looking at a temperature that's 5 degrees colder for the first half of the day than it is at the winery building itself. So we have a lot of different ranges to play with as well.
That's cool. So you have the elevation, but then you also have the temperature ranges.
That's right.
You can see where you get that diversity even within blocks, which I guess for the first
time. Yeah, when you're here, if you barrel taste with us, you can tell where you are within an acre. Just blind tasting out of barrel based on microclimates, but also our use of clonal selections.
And I have a map here. It'll be tough for everybody to see the details, but this one specifically shows the different blocks.
Yeah.
So you could speak to this just for a moment. And then we have a map of the soil, which is pretty cool as well.
Yeah, anybody on this call who's interested in seeing these maps up close, we're more than happy to send them through. Just send a note to us at info@Rift, and we're happy to send through all this documentation. So you can, if you've got soil geeks, they can really get into it. But basically, all the purple there that you're looking at is Pinot Noir. The kind of orangey color is Chardonnay. And then the balance of colors are different clones, different varieties. We're looking at, from the left-hand bottom, that's Chardonnay. That's what we call the A block, and it's much, much, much colder than anywhere else on the property. And then sort of the top area, so you have the purple vineyards, Q and N, that are beautiful south-facing terraced blocks, which give us just extraordinary color and density out of Calera clone Pinot.
And then like we said, we don't have to get too geeky with the soil map, but I'm guessing that also those varietal selections also sort of line up with the soil selections.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of going, this is the soil we have opportunity for, this is the climate that we're finding on a specific site. Here's our educated guess about what the best thing to plant there's going to be. And then sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you have to change midstream. We planted a vineyard that we've already redeveloped because we realized we made the wrong choices. When we came in, there was a lot of Italian variety. There was a lot of stuff that was not appropriate for us. There was a lot of Cabernet and Merlot, which just couldn't ripen, plain and simple. I mean, we were picking it. They were picking in November, and it was coming in as capsicum bombs. And so when we first started here, we actually dug 30 soil pits, took incredible data, and then went through and grafted 42 acres of vineyards and planted 32 new acres of vineyards. And so we really turned the battleship quickly to breathe new life into the project. Because once you know what you need to do, you just need to get on with it. Otherwise, you're going to suffer through, getting known for making ordinary Merlot for the rest of your life, and nobody wants to be known for that.
Yeah, that's a sad outcome. You're mentioning harvest. I know you do everything by hand at the estates, nights or early morning harvesting.
That's right. We do all of our harvesting between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Since we're a complete manufacturing bundle, right? We're a traditional estate. We're farming. We're doing our own picking. We're bringing it into our own winery. We've got our own team. And since it comes in as sunlight leaves essentially as bottled wine, we're able to do things that don't make a lot of sense individually if they can make sense in the whole. So we pick between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., even on our terraces, which is very challenging, some would say dangerous. Driving tractors under floodlights on steep terraces takes some really good skill. But it allows us to bring in incredibly precise and acid-driven fruit. Drop it off at 6 a.m. at the doors of the winery. 7 a.m. Cory Waller, our winemaker, arrives with his team. Bang! They're producing. They're going into processing. We never have to really do the cold soak because the grapes have come in so cold. That's Cory there. The grapes have come in so cold that we don't really need to worry about a cold soak. It does it anyway.
Oh.
It has not started the spontaneous fermentation, even though all of our yeasts that we use here are indigenous. We have an incredibly hands-off winemaking process. And so, starting it off on the right foot is really important to us. So that's, basically really focusing on that hand harvesting process at night. SOM TV did a really cool episode about our harvest, if you want to see that in action.
Oh, that's cool. I'll have to check that out. I didn't see that. That's amazing. So I want to start getting into a few of the specific wines. And If you don't mind, I'll show the labels here in a moment, but start us out with the estate line. So the estate Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which are some of our most popular amongst our team.
Sure. Well, we're known for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and we don't think about Pinot Noir as being a blending grape, but in fact, it is. I mean, most great Pinot Noirs are field blends of clones of Pinot Noir. So if you go to Echezot or you go to Clos Vougeot, it's not going to be a clone of Pinot Noir in that vineyard. There's going to be a blend of clones that make us think of Echezot or of Clos Vougeot. At Eden Rift, we believe in not just doing a single clone of Pinot Noir. Not every winery does this. It's a pain in the butt. But for the estate Pinot Noir, which is our primary voice of the estate, it's composed of different voices, making a choir, if you will. The way we present our terroir here. And so it's 828, 115, 777, Pommard. So each one of these providing its elements, the things that it does best. And sorry if I'm being verbose, but
no, this was good.
828 for us is aromatics and some density and power. But perhaps the mid palate is a little lacking. 777 for us, the aromatics are not amazing. It doesn't necessarily have the length that you demand, but it has this beautiful mid-palate textural element that plays so nicely with the 828. And together they become better than either one on its own. And so for us, when we're building these wines from harvest, we're harvesting in very small blocks. We're harvesting maybe weeks apart. We're bringing these wines in with an idea of who they are going to be in this choir. We ferment them separately. It's indigenous yeast. We don't do anything to mess with it. No enzymes, no nothing. It's a foot tread, followed by simple punch downs, and then into the barrel where it just rests. And it's about this wine's about 30% new oak, 100% barrel aged, and then we do the assemblage about 11 months after 11 months into the élevage process, and bottle at that point. Now, in that process, we're going to identify a lot of barrels that are just right for estate. This is the most important wine we make. But then we also have a little bit that goes to reserve, which is going to be a more flamboyant style of American Pinot Noir. And then we're also going to have the Valiant, which is a second wine, where if anything's not really appropriate for the main cuvee, then it'll go down to Valiant, kind of like you have a declassified village out of Premier Cru in France. And so these wines are generally going to be brighter, fresher. They're not intended to age. They're intended to be beautiful in a restaurant. And they're generally not going to have any new oak and not too much tannin. So that would be the difference.
But same vineyard sources. It's just a selection at the winery.
Yeah, even though it's appellated Central Coast, it is actually Eden Rift Estate. And it's made exactly the same way as all of our wines. Estate, reserve, single vineyards, they're all made exactly the same way.
It's amazing quality, and the value of these wines are just really, I mean, by the glass, you could do this with even with Coravin, but these wines are spectacular for the price, and it's really, you're over delivering here, and it's but it's like you said, in a way, it's the introduction, it's the entry level wine, and then it'll make people discover the terraces and the reserves. So
yeah, I mean, we'll be judged by the least of our wines, and so if that's going to be Valiant, we need to put something forward that really delivers. And it's made with the same protocols. I mean, it's organics. It's very carefully hand farmed, handmade. They really don't belong in the position they're in, but we love it. It's a wonderful way for us to make introduction to market.
Exactly. Tell us just a bit more about the Chardonnay. So the Valiant and the Estates. What's the oak treatment? What's the styles there?
So the Chardonnay goes through the same basic process as the Pinot in terms of there's an estate Chardonnay, which we think of as our primary voice of Chardonnay. It is primarily Wente clones. It is farmed from 3 sites. Excuse me. We hand harvest whole cluster at night, same as Pinot. We bring it in. We give it a very light press off into tank. We let the juice go brown. We then, once it's gone into settling overnight in a tank, then we flow it into barrel. It's 100% barrel fermented, 20% new oak, no introduction of yeast, enzymes, color, anything like that. It's very natural. It is a natural wine by any definition. And then from there, it flows into 100% barrel fermented, but only 20% new oak. We do not inoculate malolactic. It goes through ML, but it goes through indigenously. Sometimes that can take 10 months. So it's a pretty tough process to watch because there's so much risk. These wines are being asked to make themselves in the barrel, and all we're doing is watching. We do no batonnage, we do no inoculations, we do nothing except keep the barrels clean and safe and well cared for. And at the end, each barrel will be its own personality. And then we'll do the assemblage at the end. And again, you end up with a state, a reserve line, and then the Valiant with that sort of declassification strategy.
Well, it's a super rare method, but I respect it because I know, being in Burgundy many times, that your methods clearly are resulting in beautiful wines. I've tasted several vintages, and like you said, it's a long process. We have the 2017 Estate Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in stock right now, and we have the 18 vintage of everything else. So it's the current releases are 18s, and they're just as young and beautiful as can be. I mean, these wines are just at the beginning of their lives.
Well, it's an interesting thing. Part of the reason we have a later release schedule is because of our attention to keeping acidity, length, and texture. Acidity, it can be quite fierce when we first bottle. And texture and length haven't yet fully developed when we first bottle. And so we actually do a bit of a bottle aging here at the estate to allow those things to come into partnership, if you will, right? To allow the acidity to essentially mature a tiny bit. Same thing to allow the texture to develop a little bit. And we find that it's worth the extra time. It's worth the extra effort. Because again, acidity, texture, length, that's all we're focused on. Everything else will sort itself out. We're in California. We're going to get power. We're going to get color. All we can do is safeguard acidity. It's very simple.
Another rarity, though, in today's market, so I appreciate it. Let's talk about the Reserve line a bit here. Actually, I'd like to start out with the Reserve Chardonnay. Tell us, how is this differentiated from the other lines? Is it, again, just a selection? Or?
Yeah, I love this wine because when we're going through, and we spend all year tasting barrels, we're barrel babysitters most of the year. Winemaking is actually just a brief flurry of activity in the fall. The rest of the year, we're just waiting and watching. And so as the Chardonnays are aging in barrel, like I said, no batonnage, no inoculated ML. We're watching each barrel learn to be itself in a way. And there are certain barrels which just show themselves to have this sort of something ephemeral and elevated sense of themselves, either more exotic or somehow more complete. And we mark just a few of these barrels and pull them out for a reserve program. But it is truly a winemaker's reserve. At the end of the day, it's not my decision; it's Cory's decision. And this is his vision of the kind of apex of that vintage.
So, and I want to get into the terraces, which I love, and these wines have been extremely highly rated, but really well received. I know they're very small production as well. Tell us a bit about the terraces program, if you would.
Sure. So, sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. The terraces line, like I said, we have about 20% terraces. We can't farm any more terraces. We could never buy terrace fruit because there are no other Pinot terraces really in California. So we have a natural limit to what we can do in this way. Whereas I talked about our other Pinots being an assemblage of different clones, in this case, we're single clone. So it's all Calera clone, which is a suitcase import from Josh Jensen in the 70s. He was an intern for DRC, but I can't obviously speculate where the cuttings might have come from. They got into that duffel bag he took to the airport, and so it's the same clone that caused Calera to be so successful over the last 4 decades, and we stand in some ways in a place that they've established. But the terraces, we are single clone, night harvest again, very high percentage of whole cluster. The terraces Pinot Noir is about 80% whole cluster. And that whole cluster, when we do it in small fermenters, you know, the rachis is going to weave itself into a mat. And so instead of using a pneumatic press to try to punch through the rachis, the woven rachis, which will cause shearing and a release of sort of undesirable tannic structure, instead we use interns. we throw ourselves into those fermenters, and we foot tread. And for the first few days, until that cap loosens up, we foot tread just like this. And I think it's a lot of work, and we don't do it for everything because we don't need to anything that's destemmed. But for these wines, it really makes a big impact, I think. The wines end up not being afraid of tannin, not being afraid of age, and there's a savoriness that emerges. I think that there's a terroir character that we have across the lines here, across all the wines we make, across the Pinots. And I can taste it in the juice before ferment, and it's there coming out of barrel. It's there years later. So I do believe it's legit. And we have this sort of character, black tea, dried rose petal, maybe even a little citrus, that you don't find in Napa or Sonoma. You don't find it in St. Lucia. You don't find it in Santa Rita. And you certainly don't find it in France. And I think that in Pinot Noir, all we're ever doing is chasing terroir. That's all we can ever try to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I saw an interesting picture. I was hoping you could tell us a bit about your amphora, and I think those are being used for the terraces. Is that right?
So yeah, we use amphora. It's still testing, so it's not yet. Sorry, pardon me.
No problem. Yeah, I saw this picture. It was recently posted, so I figured I'd put you on the spot.
Yeah. So we do amphora. We started out with the experiment of saying, you know, what if we did Chardonnays in amphora? And what we found was that, yes, it gives us a little bit of minerality, but we've got so much minerality here from the limestone that it's the last thing we need to try to find through our winemaking techniques. But what I found with Chardonnay was that it dulled the mid-palate. There's a different way that oxygen interacts with wine through terracotta than through wood. And I found that it sort of softened the mid-palate, which wasn't what I wanted. I wanted some stridency, some energy, and I felt like this was sort of counter to that. But then what we did was we tried it with Clairiclone Pinot Noir, and it added an incredible savoriness. And there, we weren't worried about safeguarding acidity as much. There's so much of it. There's so much tannin, so much acidity. We didn't have to worry. What we found that there's this layer of savoriness in the mid-palate that just was absolutely delicious. Now, my guys absolutely despise cleaning amphorae. They're very difficult. They're very high maintenance. So, you know, it's a smaller portion of our production, but I think it plays an important role.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're about to the end of our time here, but I want to just mention for those still with us that it seems like we should all visit you because you're at a beautiful estate, and there's several different options here. And I saw one of them that was super cool was you can even take a helicopter tour, which is then accompanied with an ATV tour of the vineyards afterwards. So just tell us a bit about, so people who maybe make it out to California in the near future or planning a trip, give us just a bit about visiting the estate, if you would.
Sure. Well, I don't think you can ever really understand Eden Rift until you've been here. It's kind of like, you know, any wine region. You have to go there to really understand. And Eden Rift is a special place to me, and I think it becomes special to a lot of folks who visit. We are 1 hour south of San Jose Airport. We are just east of Monterey, as I mentioned, so it's an easy 3-day weekend if you're from out of California. If you're in San Francisco, if you're in San Francisco, it's closer than Calistoga, so it's really not that big a haul. If you're in Silicon Valley, it's a no-brainer. But you know, we get visitors from all over the world. Now you can visit via the helicopter if you have achieved that. I have not. I do not have a helicopter, but people do come frequently because we have a helipad here. And then that vehicle there are basically side-by-sides that our friends, we just pile in and grab some wines, head out in the vineyard and taste the wines in the plots from which they're grown. It's a really nice way to learn about a wine.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Christian. And for somebody who works on websites all day, I could tell you that you have a great website and a lot of great information there. So check out Eden Rift Vineyard's website as well as their Instagram page. But thank you again, Christian, for joining us today and all the great information. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. We'll see you next time on Touton Live. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.